Welcome back to Nighttime History, dear listeners. Tonight we are stepping into the quiet world of medieval monastery fish ponds, where sacred waters held swimming treasures and ancient food rules shaped the rhythm of daily life. Thank you for joining us on this gentle journey into a world where water management was both practical art and spiritual practice. Settle back into your pillows, close your eyes, and let us drift together into these peaceful waters where monks once walked stone paths at dawn, checking their carefully tended ponds before morning prayers. The morning mist rises from the still water as you stand on the worn stone walkway that edges the monastery fish pond. Your footsteps echo softly against the carefully laid stones that form the pond's border. These are not natural waters you see before you. Every stone, every channel, every gentle slope of the pond bottom was planned and built by human hands over months of careful labour. You watch as the first rays of sunlight pierce through the mist, revealing the intricate network of channels and sluices that control the water flow. The sound of trickling water fills the air as excess water spills over the carefully carved stone weirs. This is not simply a hole filled with water and fish. This is engineering wrapped in prayer, a complex system that took decades to perfect. Most people think medieval monasteries were simple places where monks just prayed and copied books. But actually, these religious communities were centers of advanced technology and scientific knowledge. The fish ponds you see before you represent some of the most sophisticated water management systems of their time. Each pond connects to others through underground channels and overflow systems that prevent flooding while maintaining perfect water levels year-round. You can see how the pond bottom slopes gently from the shallow feeding areas near the walkway to the deeper winter zones where fish will retreat when ice forms on the surface. The monks who designed this understood that different fish need different depths, different temperatures, different hiding places among the submerged logs and stone shelters they carefully placed throughout the pond. The water itself tells a story of careful management. It flows in from the upstream mill race, carrying just enough current to keep the water fresh and oxygenated, but not so much that it disturbs the fish or erodes the carefully shaped banks. You notice small wooden gates and metal grates that can be adjusted to control this flow, allowing the pond keepers to drain sections for cleaning or to trap fish during harvest times. Brother Thomas approaches along the path, his woolen robes still damp with morning dew. He carries a wooden bucket filled with kitchen scraps and grain, the daily food offering for the fish community swimming beneath the surface. You watch as he scatters handfuls of bread crusts and vegetable trimmings across the water, and within moments the surface erupts with gentle splashing as carp and pike rise to feed. The fish in these ponds are not wild creatures that happened to find their way here. Each species was carefully selected and introduced by monks who understood which fish would thrive together and which would provide the best nutrition during the long fasting periods that marked the religious calendar. The large carp you see breaking the surface were brought here as fingerlings from other monastery ponds, part of a network of fish trading that connected religious houses across hundreds of miles. You notice the different zones within the single pond before you. Near the inlet where fresh water enters, smaller fish dart between underwater grasses that the monks planted to provide oxygen and shelter. In the deeper center section, the larger carp cruise slowly through their underwater territory. Along the far shore, partially submerged logs create a nursery area where young fish can hide from their larger pond mates. The stones beneath your feet were quarried from the monastery's own lands and fitted together without mortar, allowing water to seep through and maintain the proper moisture in the surrounding soil. This prevents the pond banks from drying and cracking during summer months, while also creating the damp microclimate that supports the water plants growing along the edges. Brother Thomas pauses in his feeding routine to check one of the wooden trap boxes partially submerged near the outlet channel. These ingenious devices allow fish to swim in but not out, making it possible to harvest specific quantities without draining the entire pond. The sound of his wooden tool scraping against the trap's sides echoes across the still water as he examines the morning's catch. Most people think monastery fish were just basic carp, but actually these medieval aquaculture systems supported remarkable diversity. You can see evidence of this complexity in the different feeding patterns visible on the water's surface. Some fish rise immediately when food appears. Others wait for the commotion to die down before approaching cautiously. And still others prefer to scavenge along the bottom for sunken morsels. Let us stop here for a moment in our journey through these sacred waters. If you are finding peace in these quiet monastery mornings, please consider joining our community of nighttime travelers by subscribing to Nighttime History and turning on notifications so you never miss our gentle explorations of the past. A like on this video helps support the channel and lets us know these stories are bringing you comfort. We would love to hear in the comments where you are settling in to sleep tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world as you listen to these medieval waters. The religious calendar that governs life in this monastery creates a complex rhythm of feast and fast that makes these fish ponds absolutely essential. You are witnessing a food system designed around the nearly 200 days each year when the church forbids eating meat from warm-blooded animals. During these fasting periods, fish become the primary protein source for the entire monastic community. Brother Thomas explains the intricate rules as he continues his morning rounds. On Wednesdays, Fridays and Saturdays, during the 40 days of Lent, the 12 days before Christmas, and numerous other holy periods throughout the year, the bells that call monks to prayer also signal a shift to fish-based meals. But not all fish count the same way in these religious calculations. You learn that the church considers some aquatic creatures more acceptable than others during fasting periods. Fish with scales like carp and pike are always permitted, while the status of eels remains debated among different monasteries. Some communities classify beavers and certain water birds as fish because they live in water, while others maintain stricter interpretations of what constitutes acceptable fasting food. The timing of fish harvests must align perfectly with these religious requirements. You watch Brother Thomas examine the growth of young carp in the shallow nursery areas, calculating whether they will reach proper size by the approaching Lent season. Too small, and they will not provide adequate nutrition for the community. Too large, and they become wasteful luxury rather than appropriate fasting sustenance. The monastery kitchen brothers work closely with the fish pond keepers to plan meals that will sustain hard-working monks through long fasting periods. Fresh fish appears on the table during shorter fasting days, while preserved fish stored in salt barrels or dried in the monastery's smoking chambers provides protein during the extended fasts of Lent and Advent. You notice how the pond system includes special holding areas where live fish can be kept temporarily before slaughter, ensuring the freshest possible meals. These smaller pools, connected to the main ponds by narrow channels, allow the fish keepers to select exactly the right number and size of fish for each meal without disturbing the larger breeding population. Water temperature becomes crucial during these harvest times. Brother Thomas tests the water with his hand, knowing that fish caught from warmer water will spoil more quickly than those taken when the water is cool. This knowledge shapes the daily rhythm of fish collection, with most harvesting happening in early morning hours when the water holds the night's coolness. The monks have developed preservation techniques that extend the useful life of their fish harvest far beyond the few days. Fresh fish remains edible. You can smell the wood smoke drifting from the fish smoking shed near the ponds, where whole carp hang in the aromatic haze of oak and applewood fires. These smoked fish will provide protein for weeks to come. Salt barrels lined up in the monastery's cold storage rooms hold fish preserved in layers of precious salt, obtained through trade networks that connect this remote religious house to coastal salt works hundreds of miles away. The investment in salt represents a significant expense, but one justified by the ability to maintain proper nutrition through the longest fasting seasons. Some fish receive special preparation for the most solemn fasting periods. You observe Brother Thomas selecting particularly fine specimens that will be prepared as fish pies, or elaborate fish-shaped breads that provide both nutrition and visual appeal during meals that might otherwise become monotonous through weeks of limited food options. The fish pond calendar follows both natural seasons and religious observances, creating a complex rhythm that requires careful planning and deep understanding of both aquatic life cycles and liturgical requirements. As winter approaches, you can see how the monastery prepares for months when ice will cover the ponds and fishing becomes nearly impossible, making the preserved fish stores absolutely critical for community survival. The monastery bell tower chimes the hour of terce as you walk alongside Brother Francis, the monastery's cellarer, whose weathered hands hold a collection of wooden tablets marked with intricate scratches and symbols. These are not random markings, but a sophisticated calendar system that tracks the ebb and flow of dietary restrictions throughout the year. Each mark represents a day when specific foods transform from forbidden to blessed, or blessed to forbidden, according to rules that stretch back centuries. You discover that the word fast itself misleads modern understanding. Most people think medieval fasting meant eating nothing at all, but actually, these religious fasts rarely involved complete abstinence from food. Instead, they created elaborate categories of permitted and forbidden foods that shifted like tides throughout the year. A piece of cheese that brings damnation on Wednesday becomes perfectly acceptable on Thursday. Not because the cheese changed, but because time itself carries moral weight in this religious world. Brother Francis traces his finger along the wooden markings as he explains how the monastery kitchen must navigate 40 different types of fasting days scattered throughout the year. Some prohibit only meat from four-legged animals. Others forbid anything that comes from four-legged animals, including milk, cheese, and eggs. The most severe fasts eliminate all animal products except fish, while certain feast days require specific foods to appear on the table, regardless of cost or availability. The calculations grow more complex when you learn that fasting rules change based on the day of the week, the season, and even the social status of visitors staying at the monastery. A bishop arriving during Lent receives different food than a travelling merchant, not because of favoritism, but because church law prescribes different dietary requirements for different ranks of clergy and lay people during holy seasons. You watch Brother Francis consult a second set of tablets that track the lunar calendar alongside the solar year. Easter's shifting date creates a cascade of changing fast days that can move by more than a month from year to year. This means the fish pond harvest schedule must remain flexible enough to provide adequate protein, Whether Lent begins in early February or late March, a logistical challenge that requires careful planning and deep understanding of fish growth cycles. The monastery's approach to interpreting these rules reveals surprising flexibility within apparent rigidity. You learn that fish caught in salt water receive different treatment than those from freshwater ponds, not because of taste or nutrition, but because church scholars debated whether creatures living in the primordial salt waters mentioned in Genesis carry different spiritual significance than those inhabiting inland streams and ponds. Brother Francis opens a leather-bound manuscript filled with dietary rulings collected from bishops and abbots across Europe. These pages reveal how differently various monastic communities interpret identical fasting laws. Some monasteries classify barnacle geese as fish because medieval naturalists believed they grew from barnacles attached to driftwood. Others maintain strict distinctions between creatures of air, land, and water that would satisfy modern biological categories. The economic impact of these shifting food rules extends far beyond the monastery walls. You observe merchants arriving at the monastery gates with cartloads of goods timed precisely to religious calendar demands. Cheese sellers appear just before feast days, when dairy products become not just permitted, but required for proper celebration. Spice merchants arrive before major fasts, knowing that limited food options create higher demand for flavouring that can make simple fish meals more palatable. You discover that the fish pond system must produce different species for different religious occasions. Pike, with their fierce appearance and sharp teeth, serve as appropriate symbols during penitential seasons when meals should remind diners of spiritual struggle. Gentle carp, with their peaceful nature and ability to grow large on simple plant foods, appear more often during ordinary time when fasting serves maintenance rather than penance. The timing of fish harvests reveals another layer of complexity in religious food rules. Fish caught during daylight hours on fast days carry different spiritual significance than those harvested at night or on feast days. Some monastic communities refuse to eat fish that died naturally in the ponds, considering only those killed intentionally for human consumption appropriate for religious meals. Brother Francis shows you a collection of brass weights used to ensure that fish portions meet canonical requirements for fast day meals. Church law doesn't simply prohibit certain foods during fasting periods. It also regulates portion sizes and meal frequency. A monk who eats too much fish during Lent commits as serious a violation as one who eats forbidden meat, creating the need for careful measurement and distribution of pond harvests. The monastery kitchen maintains separate cooking vessels, serving dishes, and eating utensils for fast days and feast days. You can see the wooden bowls used exclusively for fish meals, their surfaces stained dark from years of fish oils and herbs. These never touch meat or dairy products, preventing even microscopic contamination that might violate fasting requirements. The cost of maintaining duplicate kitchen equipment represents a significant investment that few outside monastic life fully understand. Water itself becomes a regulated substance during certain extreme fasting periods. You learn that some monastic rules restrict not just food, but also the temperature and quantity of water consumed during the most severe penitential seasons. Cold water from the fish ponds serves penitential purposes, while heated water approaches the luxury forbidden during times of spiritual discipline. The fish pond keepers develop sophisticated understanding of how different preparation methods affect the religious status of their harvest. Raw fish carries different canonical weight than cooked fish. fish preserved in salt receives different treatment than fish preserved in oil. Even the type of wood used for smoking fish can influence its appropriateness for specific religious occasions, with aromatic woods considered too luxurious for severe fasting periods. You observe the monastery's approach to visiting dignitaries who arrive during fasting seasons. The abbot cannot simply ignore dietary restrictions because of important guests, but neither can he offer inadequate hospitality to bishops or nobles who support the monastery needs. The solution involves elaborate fish preparations that satisfy both fasting requirements and social expectations, turning simple pond carp into dishes that rival the meat courses served during feast seasons. The children living at the monastery as oblates, given by their families to religious life, learn these complex food rules through daily practice rather than academic study. You watch young boys helping Brother Francis sort fish by size and species, unconsciously absorbing the knowledge of which fish serve which religious purposes. Their education in dietary law happens through their hands and stomachs rather than through books. Most of them cannot yet read. The monastery's relationship with neighbouring communities becomes intertwined with these religious food cycles. Peasant families time their visits to the monastery to coincide with feast days when the religious community shares more generous meals with visitors. Local fishermen know when the monastery will pay premium prices for specific types of fish needed for upcoming religious observances. You discover that the fish ponds produce more than just food during fasting seasons. The monastery collects fish scales for use in decorative arts projects, fish bones for tool making, and fish oil for lamp fuel and leather treatment. These byproducts become especially valuable during long fasting seasons when the community processes large quantities of fish, turning every part of their aquatic harvest into useful materials. The seasonal rhythm of religious fasting creates cycles of abundance and scarcity that shape the entire monastery's relationship with food. During ordinary time between major fasting seasons, the community enjoys diverse diets that include meat, dairy, eggs and fish in combinations that would be unthinkable during Lent or Advent. These periods of plenty allow the monks to rebuild their strength for upcoming fasting challenges, while also preserving fish populations in the ponds. Brother Francis reveals how the monastery maintains detailed records of fish consumption during different religious seasons, tracking not just quantities, but also the spiritual effects of various fasting practices on community health and devotion. These records influence decisions about pond management, fish breeding programs, and even the construction of new ponds to support changing interpretations of religious dietary law. The complexity of coordinating fish pond harvests with religious calendar requirements creates a specialized knowledge system passed down from one generation of pond keepers to the next. As evening prayers call the community to Vespers, you realize that managing these sacred waters requires not just understanding of fish and water, but also deep knowledge of theology, canon law, and the intricate dance between human needs and divine commands that shapes every meal in this holy place. The pre-dawn darkness envelops you as Brother Aldrich's sandaled feet crunch softly across the frost-covered grass leading to the fish ponds. His breath forms small clouds in the cold air as he carries a hooded lantern that casts dancing shadows across the stone walkways. This is the hour of Lauds when most of his brothers gather in the chapel for morning prayers, but Brother Aldrich's devotion takes a different form. His prayers rise with the mist from the water's surface as he begins the daily ritual that has shaped his life for over 20 years. The wooden staff in his weathered hands bears countless small mochas, each one representing a day spent in service to these aquatic communities. Most people think monastery fish keepers were simply workers assigned to an unpleasant task, but actually these men were among the most skilled and knowledgeable members of their religious communities. Their understanding of water chemistry, fish behaviour, and aquatic ecology rivaled that of any natural philosopher of their age. Brother Aldrich approaches the first pond with the careful steps of someone who reads the water like a sacred text. His trained eye immediately notices that the surface tension appears different from yesterday, suggesting changes in temperature or dissolved nutrients that could affect fish health. He kneels beside the stone edge and dips his hand into the water, not just testing temperature, but feeling for the subtle vibrations that indicate whether fish are feeding actively or resting quietly in the depths. The tools of his trade hang from a leather belt worn smooth by decades of daily use, a bronze mesh scoop for collecting samples of pond water and debris, a wooden probe marked with notches that measure water depth at different points around each pond, metal hooks of various sizes for adjusting the flow gates and cleaning the intake channels. Each tool represents years of refinement, modified and improved through trial and error until they serve their purposes perfectly. You watch as Brother Aldrich performs his first daily assessment, moving systematically around the pond's perimeter. He examines the stone joints where water seepage might indicate structural problems. He checks the wooden sluice gates for swelling or warping that could affect water flow. His fingers trace the metal grates that prevent fish from escaping into the outlet channels, feeling for loose connections or damage from ice or debris. The sound of his movements attracts fish to the surface, and you observe how he recognizes individual carp by their size, colouring, and swimming patterns. Like a shepherd who knows each sheep in his flock, Brother Aldrich has named the largest fish in his ponds and tracks their health, growth, and breeding behaviour with detailed attention. The massive carp he calls Solomon has lived in these waters for 15 years, growing from a fingerling smaller than a man's thumb to a creature weighing more than a newborn lamb. Brother Aldrich's knowledge extends beyond simple fish husbandry to sophisticated understanding of aquatic ecosystems. He explains how the underwater plants he tends serve multiple purposes beyond decoration. The submerged grasses produce oxygen during daylight hours while providing shelter for young fish and food for herbivorous species. The floating lily pads create shade that prevents excessive algae growth while their root systems filter impurities from the water. You discover that maintaining proper water quality requires constant vigilance and intervention. Brother Aldrich carries a collection of wooden vials containing water samples from different ponds, each labelled with symbols that track changes over time. Clear water might seem ideal, but actually indicates a lack of the microscopic life that forms the foundation of healthy fish populations. Slightly cloudy water often signals a thriving ecosystem full of the tiny organisms that feed young fish and maintain proper nutrient cycles. The daily feeding routine reveals Brother Aldrich's deep understanding of fish behaviour and nutrition. Most people think medieval fish keepers simply threw scraps into their ponds, but actually, these monks developed sophisticated feeding programs tailored to different species, seasons, and growth stages. Morning feedings focus on high-energy foods that help fish maintain body temperature as water warms. Evening meals emphasize easily digestible options that won't ferment overnight and pollute the water. Brother Aldrich demonstrates how he varies feeding locations around each pond to prevent the aggressive competition that can stress fish and lead to disease. Large carp receive their portions in the deeper central areas where they naturally prefer to feed. Smaller fish get scattered handfuls along the shallow margins where they can feed safely without harassment from their bigger pond mates. The timing of these feedings follows not just religious hours, but also natural fish behavior patterns, learned through years of careful observation. The seasonal changes in fish keeper responsibilities reveal the complexity of managing aquatic life through yearly cycles. Winter brings the challenge of maintaining fish health when ice covers the pond surfaces and normal feeding becomes impossible. Brother Aldrich shows you the breathing holes he maintains by breaking ice daily, ensuring adequate oxygen exchange even when thick ice seals the pond surfaces for weeks at a time. Spring pond management involves careful assessment of winter survival rates and the delicate process of encouraging fish to resume active feeding after months of minimal activity. Brother Aldrich knows which fish survived the winter stress and which may need special attention to recover their health. He adjusts water levels to create optimal conditions for spawning, understanding that successful reproduction requires specific water temperatures, vegetation density, and protection from predators. Summer presents different challenges, as increased water temperatures can reduce dissolved oxygen levels and promote harmful bacterial growth. Brother Aldrich manages water flow rates to maintain circulation without creating currents too strong for fish comfort. He harvests excess vegetation that might decay and pollute the water while leaving enough plant life to maintain ecological balance. Autumn brings the intensive harvest season when Brother Aldrich must select which fish to remove for winter food stores and which to retain for breeding stock and next year's population. His decisions require sophisticated understanding of fish genetics, growth rates, and reproductive potential. The survival of the monastery through winter fasting seasons depends on his ability to predict pond productivity and plan harvests accordingly. The tools and techniques Brother Aldrich employs reveal medieval innovation in aquaculture management. His fishing nets are not simple devices, but carefully designed instruments that allow selective harvesting without disturbing fish populations unnecessarily. Different mesh sizes capture different species and age groups. Weighted nets sink to specific depths where target fish prefer to swim. Floating nets work near the surface for species that feed on insects and plant matter. You observe Brother Aldrich repairing nets using techniques passed down through generations of monastery fish keepers. The knots he ties follow patterns that distribute stress evenly while remaining easy to untie when repairs become necessary. The wooden floats and stone weights attached to his nets are carved and shaped to create specific underwater behaviors that guide fish into capture zones without causing panic or injury. Brother Aldrich's relationship with his fellow monks reveals how fish keeping integrates with broader monastery life. He coordinates closely with the kitchen brothers to plan harvests that align with meal requirements and religious calendar demands. His knowledge of which fish will be ready for harvest on specific dates influences menu planning weeks in advance. During major feast days, he selects the finest specimens from his ponds to create impressive displays that honor both guests and religious occasions. The record-keeping responsibilities of monastery fish keepers demonstrate their sophisticated approach to aquaculture management. Brother Aldrich maintains wooden tablets marked with symbols that track fish populations, harvest quantities, feeding schedules, and water quality observations. These records allow him to identify patterns and trends that might otherwise go unnoticed. Poor harvest yields in certain ponds can be traced to specific environmental factors or management decisions, leading to improved practices in following years. His training of younger monks reveals how fish-keeping knowledge transmits within monastic communities. Most people think this work was learned through simple imitation, but actually, monastery fish-keeping involved complex theoretical understanding combined with practical skills that required years to master. Brother Aldrich teaches novices to read water conditions, recognize fish diseases, predict weather effects on aquatic life, and coordinate pond management with religious requirements. The physical demands of fishkeeper work shape both body and spirit in ways unique among monastery occupations. The constant bending, lifting, and walking required for pond maintenance builds strength and flexibility, while the quiet, meditative nature of working with water and observing aquatic life provides opportunities for contemplation and prayer. Brother Aldrich explains how the rhythmic motions of net repair and the patient observation of fish behavior become forms of moving meditation that complement formal religious observances. His knowledge extends to the broader ecosystem surrounding the monastery ponds. He understands how wild birds affect fish populations, which species should be welcomed, and which represent threats to pond productivity. His management of water plants considers not just fish needs, but also the requirements of beneficial insects, amphibians, and other creatures that contribute to healthy aquatic environments. Brother Aldrich's expertise in fish diseases and treatments reveals medieval understanding of aquatic veterinary medicine that rivals modern knowledge in some areas. He recognizes symptoms of parasitic infections, bacterial diseases, and nutritional deficiencies while maintaining a pharmacy of herbal treatments and environmental modifications that promote fish health without disrupting pond ecosystems. As the morning sun climbs higher and the monastery bells call the community to the day's first communal meal, Brother Aldrich completes his initial pond rounds with the satisfaction of someone whose devotion takes form in the healthy shimmer of fish scales beneath clear water and the gentle sound of water flowing through channels built to last centuries. The autumn air carries the scent of dying leaves as you stand beside Brother Aldrich at the edge of the great pond, watching the water's surface ripple with the movement of fish gathering in the deeper sections. The monastery bells have just finished ringing none, marking the 9th hour, and the slanting afternoon light reveals how dramatically the underwater world has changed since your first visit in spring. What appeared as scattered individual fish during the warmer months now moves in slow, coordinated schools, as carp instinctively prepare for the coming winter. Brother Aldrich points to areas of the pond where the water appears slightly darker, indicating the deeper channels where fish will spend the coldest months. Most people think fish simply become inactive during winter, but actually these medieval pond keepers understood that different species follow distinct seasonal patterns that require careful management and preparation. The large carp are already beginning to reduce their feeding as their metabolism slows in response to cooling water temperatures, while the smaller roach and tench continue active feeding to build energy reserves for winter survival. You watch Brother Aldrich perform tasks that would have seemed unnecessary during summer months. He removes dead vegetation from the pond edges, not for aesthetic reasons, but because decaying plant matter consumes oxygen as it decomposes, creating dangerous conditions for fish trapped under winter ice. His movements are deliberate and measured, reflecting decades of experience with the delicate balance between cleaning too much and leaving too little organic matter to support the pond's ecosystem through months of reduced biological activity. The wooden platforms extending into the pond serve purposes that change with the seasons. During summer, they provided convenient access for feeding and observation. Now they become staging areas for specialized winter equipment. Long-handled tools lean against the platform posts designed for breaking ice and maintaining breathing holes when the pond surface freezes solid. Bundles of dried reeds wait nearby, ready to be inserted through ice holes to provide additional oxygen exchange during the deepest winter months. Brother Aldrich explains how the monastery's religious calendar aligns with natural seasonal changes in ways that optimize both spiritual observance and practical pond management. The Feast of St. Martin in November traditionally marks the beginning of intensive fish harvesting, not just because church law designates it as the start of winter fasting season, but because fish have reached peak condition after summer feeding while remaining active enough for efficient capture before winter dormancy begins. You discover that medieval fish keepers possessed sophisticated understanding of fish reproduction cycles that modern aquaculture has largely rediscovered rather than improved upon. Brother Aldrich shows you the shallow spawning areas he prepared during spring, now empty, but marked with stakes that will guide next year's breeding season preparations. These areas required specific water depths, particular types of aquatic vegetation, and protection from both predators and excessive water flow during the critical spawning period. The spring spawning season brought challenges and opportunities that shaped the entire yearly cycle of pond management. Brother Aldrich describes how he monitored water temperatures daily during March and April, waiting for the precise conditions that trigger different fish species to begin reproductive behavior. Carp spawn when water reaches specific temperature ranges that can vary by several degrees between different years, requiring flexible planning and constant observation. You learn that successful fish reproduction in monastery ponds required intervention and management far beyond simply providing suitable habitat. Brother Aldrich collected fish eggs during spawning season, carefully moving them to protected nursery areas where survival rates increased dramatically. This practice, which modern aquaculture considers advanced technique, was standard procedure in well-managed medieval monastery ponds. The summer months that seemed like periods of simple maintenance actually involved the most complex and demanding pond management activities of the entire year. Brother Aldrich managed water levels through a sophisticated system of channels and gates that prevented both drought stress and flood damage during unpredictable summer weather patterns. Too little water concentrated fish in small areas where disease could spread rapidly. Too much water diluted nutrients and made feeding inefficient. The heat of summer brought challenges that required both technical knowledge and physical endurance. Brother Aldrich worked during the coolest hours of early morning and late evening, understanding that disturbing fish during the heat of midday could stress them and make them vulnerable to disease. His summer routine involved multiple daily visits to check water quality, adjust flow rates, and monitor fish behavior for signs of heat stress or oxygen depletion. You observe how Brother Aldrich's summer feeding program differed dramatically from other seasons. Fish metabolisms increased with warmer water, requiring more frequent meals but smaller portions to prevent uneaten food from fouling the water. He varied feeding times throughout the day, understanding that fish appetite patterns change with temperature and light conditions. Early morning feedings took advantage of fish activity patterns, while evening meals provided energy for overnight growth and maintenance. The transition from summer to autumn revealed the sophisticated planning required for successful pond management through seasonal changes. Brother Aldrich gradually reduced feeding quantities and frequencies as fish metabolism slowed with cooling water. This process required careful judgment as underfeeding could weaken fish before winter, while overfeeding could pollute water, just as biological processes that clean the pond ecosystem also slowed with temperature drops. Most people think medieval pond keepers simply hoped their fish would survive winter, but actually, Brother Aldrich followed detailed protocols developed over generations of monastic aquaculture experience. He selected which fish to harvest before winter and which to retain based on sophisticated understanding of fish, physiology, genetics, and behavior. Older, larger fish often survived winter stress better than younger specimens, but they also provided more food if harvested, creating complex decisions that balanced immediate needs against long-term pond productivity. The preparation of ponds for winter involved techniques that demonstrated remarkable understanding of aquatic ecosystem dynamics. Brother Aldrich removed excess organic matter that would consume oxygen during decomposition under ice cover. He adjusted water depths to ensure adequate oxygen reserves in deeper areas, while preventing complete freezing in shallow zones where beneficial bacteria lived. These preparations began in late autumn and continued through the first frosts. Winter pond management required daily attention despite popular assumptions that frozen ponds needed no care. Brother Aldrich maintained breathing holes in ice cover using tools designed specifically for this purpose. He understood that fish could survive months under ice if adequate oxygen remained available, but that even brief periods of complete oxygen depletion could kill entire pond populations. His winter routine involved checking and maintaining these breathing holes regardless of weather conditions. The religious calendar provided structure for seasonal pond activities that aligned practical necessities with spiritual observances. Advent fasting requirements increased demand for preserved fish, just as ponds entered winter dormancy, requiring careful coordination between autumn harvest schedules and food preservation activities. The monastery kitchen brothers worked closely with Brother Aldrich to ensure adequate fish supplies for the long winter fasting season. You discover that winter actually provided opportunities for pond improvements and repairs that were impossible during active seasons. Brother Aldrich used the months when fish were dormant to repair stonework, rebuild wooden structures, and modify pond configurations. The monastery quarry remained active through winter, providing stone for pond maintenance projects that would resume when spring weather returned. Spring awakening brought both excitement and anxiety, as Brother Aldrich assessed winter survival rates and began preparations for another yearly cycle. The first warm days of March triggered gradual resumption of feeding programs, but timing remained critical. Fish awakening too early could exhaust energy reserves if cold weather returned, while delayed feeding could miss optimal growth opportunities during the brief spring season. The coordination between natural seasonal changes and religious calendar requirements created complex planning challenges that demonstrated the sophisticated management capabilities of medieval monastery fish keepers. Easter's shifting date meant that spring fasting requirements could begin while ponds remained partially frozen or after fish had become active and begun spawning, requiring flexible approaches to harvest scheduling and food preservation. Brother Aldrich's seasonal knowledge extended beyond fish management to understanding how weather patterns, lunar cycles, and regional climate variations affected pond productivity. He tracked correlations between winter severity and spring fish behavior, summer rainfall and autumn harvest yields, and religious calendar dates and optimal management timing. This knowledge, accumulated over decades of careful observation, made him as valuable to monastery survival as any other skilled craftsman or scholar. The yearly rhythm of pond life reflected the deeper spiritual rhythms of monastic existence, where natural cycles and religious observances intertwined to create meaning and purpose in daily activities. As winter approached and Brother Aldrich completed his seasonal preparations, you could see how his work embodied the monastic understanding that caring for God's creatures through changing seasons was itself a form of prayer and devotion that sustained both body and soul through the turning of the yearly wheel. The winter light filters through the bare branches overhead as Brother Aldrich leads you to a smaller pond tucked behind the main fish enclosures, its surface still partially covered with morning ice. He breaks through the thin frozen layer with his wooden staff, revealing water that teems with movement, unlike anything you observed in the larger carp ponds. Dozens of sleek, snake-like forms dart through the dark water, their sinuous bodies catching the pale sunlight as they weave between submerged branches and stone crevices. These are eels, Brother Aldrich explains, and their presence in monastery waters reveals the remarkable diversity that medieval aquaculture achieved far beyond the familiar carp and pike of popular imagination. Most people think monastery fish ponds contained only a few basic species, but actually, these religious communities cultivated complex aquatic ecosystems that included creatures modern fish farmers rarely attempt to manage together. You watch in fascination as Brother Aldrich demonstrates feeding techniques specific to eel management. Unlike the surface feeding of carp, eels prefer their meals delivered to the bottom of the pond, requiring specialized techniques and different food types. He scatters chopped earthworms and small pieces of fresh fish across the pond bottom using a long-handled wooden scoop, and within moments the water erupts with feeding activity as dozens of eels emerge from hiding places you never suspected existed. The theological status of eels created ongoing debates within monastic communities that Brother Aldrich navigates with practiced diplomatic skill. Some church authorities classified eels as acceptable fasting food because they live in water, while others questioned whether creatures that could travel overland during mating migrations truly qualified as fish. The monastery resolved this dilemma by maintaining separate eel ponds that could be excluded from harvest during periods when their canonical status remained uncertain. Brother Aldrich shows you evidence of the sophisticated eel breeding program the monastery has developed over generations. Unlike carp that reproduce readily in captivity, eels require complex life cycles that medieval monks understood only partially, yet managed successfully through careful observation and experimentation. The young eels in this pond, called elvers, arrived as tiny transparent creatures barely visible to the naked eye, transported in water-filled containers from rivers where they appeared mysteriously each spring. The eel ponds demonstrate engineering solutions to unique challenges these creatures present. You notice that the stone walls extend deeper into the pond bottom than those surrounding carp enclosures, preventing the eels from burrowing underneath and escaping. Special grates cover every water inlet and outlet with mesh fine enough to contain even the smallest elvers while allowing proper water circulation. The wooden covers that can be placed over sections of the pond prevent eels from climbing out during their nocturnal wanderings. In another corner of the monastery's aquatic complex, Brother Aldrich reveals ponds dedicated to creatures that challenge every assumption about medieval fish farming. Freshwater mussels filter water through specialized beds of gravel and sand, their shells occasionally opening to reveal the pearl-like secretions that make them valuable for decoration as well as food. These bivalves require careful management of water purity and flow rates that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of filter feeding biology. The mussel cultivation reveals economic dimensions of monastery aquaculture that extended far beyond basic nutrition. Brother Aldrich explains how the pearls found in freshwater mussels, while less valuable than marine varieties, still provided income for monastery operations when sold to wealthy patrons seeking decorative items for religious vessels and vestments. The shells themselves serve practical purposes, ground into powder for medicinal preparations or carved into small utensils and ornaments. You discover that the monastery maintains specialized ponds for creatures that exist at the boundary between fish and other categories of aquatic life. Freshwater crayfish scuttle across the bottom of shallow pools designed to mimic their natural habitat, complete with underwater caves created from carefully arranged stones and submerged logs. These crustaceans provided protein during fasting periods, while their hard shells supplied material for various practical applications around the monastery. Most people think crayfish are simply small lobsters, but actually, medieval aquaculturists understood significant biological differences that influenced their cultivation methods. Brother Aldrich demonstrates how crayfish require different water chemistry than fish, preferring harder water with higher mineral content. Their territorial nature means they cannot be crowded together like schooling fish, requiring pond designs that provide individual hiding places and territorial boundaries. The crayfish breeding program reveals medieval understanding of crustacean biology that anticipated many modern aquaculture techniques. Brother Aldrich shows you the special nursery areas where female crayfish carry their eggs attached to their bodies for weeks before the young hatch as miniature versions of their parents. Protecting these brooding females from predation and disturbance requires specialized knowledge and careful pond management that few outside monastic communities possessed. In the most surprising section of the monastery's aquatic facilities, you discover ponds dedicated to creatures that blur the lines between fishing and hunting. Water birds, including various species of ducks and geese, paddle through specially designed enclosures that provide both aquatic and terrestrial habitat. These birds serve multiple purposes in the monastery economy, providing eggs, meat, feathers and down, while also helping control insect populations around the fish ponds. The waterfowl management program demonstrates sophisticated understanding of avian biology and behavior. Brother Aldrich explains how different duck species require different nesting sites, food sources, and social arrangements. Some prefer to nest in reedy shallows, while others need elevated platforms or artificial nesting boxes placed strategically around the pond edges. The monastery maintains detailed breeding records that track which combinations of species coexist successfully and which create competitive problems. You learn that the canonical status of waterfowl during fasting periods created even more complex theological discussions than eels. Some monastic communities classified certain water birds as fish because they lived primarily in aquatic environments and ate fish-based diets. Others maintained strict distinctions between creatures of air and water that excluded all birds from fasting menus. Brother Aldrich's monastery resolved these debates by maintaining flexibility in their interpretation based on seasonal needs and visiting authority opinions. The integration of different aquatic species reveals ecological understanding that modern aquaculture has rediscovered rather than surpassed. Brother Aldrich shows how ducks and geese help fertilize fish ponds with their droppings while stirring pond bottoms during feeding that releases nutrients for plant growth. Fish waste provides fertilizer for aquatic plants that feed waterfowl, creating closed-loop systems that maximize productivity while minimizing external inputs. In hidden corners of the monastery grounds, you discover evidence of even more exotic aquatic cultivation experiments. Small pools contain lamprey, those primitive fish-like creatures with circular sucker mouths that medieval nobles considered delicacies. The monastery's lamprey program required specialized knowledge of these creatures' complex life cycles and specific habitat requirements that few other institutions attempted to master. Brother Aldrich reveals that lamprey cultivation represented the monastery's most ambitious aquaculture project, requiring coordination with river systems where these creatures spent part of their life cycle. Young lamprey, called amocoets, required specialized muddy environments where they could burrow and filter feed for years before transforming into their adult parasitic form. The monastery maintained relationships with downstream communities that helped manage lamprey populations through their complex migrations. The variety of preservation techniques required for different aquatic species demonstrates the sophisticated food technology medieval monasteries developed. While carp could be kept alive in holding ponds until needed, eels required different preservation methods that took advantage of their high oil content. Lamprey demanded special preparation techniques that modern cuisine has largely forgotten. Each species contributed unique flavors, textures, and nutritional profiles to the monastic diet during different seasons and religious observances. You observe Brother Aldrich tending to creatures that occupied specialized ecological niches within the monastery's aquatic systems. Freshwater snails graze on algae that might otherwise overwhelm pond ecosystems, while their shells provide material for mortar and their bodies offer protein during the most restrictive fasting periods. These tiny creatures required minimal direct management but played crucial roles in maintaining water quality and ecological balance. The monastery's approach to managing predator species reveals sophisticated understanding of aquatic ecosystem dynamics. Rather than eliminating all potential threats to their fish stocks, they maintained controlled populations of pike and other predatory fish that helped prevent overcrowding and disease outbreaks among prey species. This management required careful balance and constant monitoring to prevent predators from eliminating entire populations of valuable fish. Brother Aldrich explains how the monastery participates in regional networks for exchanging breeding stock and sharing aquaculture knowledge. Different religious houses specialized in different species based on their local water conditions, climate, and expertise. The monastery received new bloodlines of various species while contributing their own breeding successes to communities throughout the region. These exchanges prevented inbreeding and maintained genetic diversity, crucial for healthy aquatic populations. The seasonal management of diverse species required coordination and timing that demonstrated remarkable organizational capabilities. Different species reproduced at different times, required harvesting at different seasons, and demanded varying preservation techniques. Brother Aldrich's knowledge extended to understanding how weather patterns, water temperatures, and food availability affected dozens of different aquatic species simultaneously. As evening approaches and the monastery bells call the community to vespers, you realize that the waters surrounding this religious house contain a hidden world of remarkable complexity and diversity that challenges every assumption about medieval capabilities and knowledge. revealing aquatic communities as sophisticated as any modern aquaculture facility. The sound of wooden cartwheels rumbling across cobblestones draws your attention from the evening feeding of the eel ponds as a merchant's wagon approaches the monastery gates. Brother Aldrich glances up from his work, recognizing the distinctive blue and yellow painted sides that mark this vehicle as belonging to Herman, the fish trader, whose routes connect dozens of religious houses across 3 kingdoms. The timing of his arrival is no coincidence, for tomorrow marks the feast of St. Andrew, patron saint of fishermen, when demand for premium fish reaches its seasonal peak. You follow Brother Aldrich as he walks toward the gates to meet Herman, whose weathered hands already hold the leather-bound ledger that records debts, credits, and promises stretching across hundreds of miles of medieval trade routes. Most people think monasteries existed as self-sufficient islands isolated from worldly commerce, but actually these religious communities anchored some of the most sophisticated economic networks of their era, with fish ponds serving as liquid banks that stored wealth in living, growing form. Herman's wagon reveals the complexity of medieval fish commerce as he and his apprentices begin unloading wooden barrels, clay vessels, and woven baskets containing aquatic treasures from distant waters. Live eels from the Rhine swim in specially designed transport containers that maintain water circulation during weeks of overland travel. Preserved sturgeon from the Baltic arrives packed in precious salt that costs more per pound than many people earn in a month. Small glass bottles contain fish oils and extracts valued for medicinal purposes by communities hundreds of miles from any navigable water. Brother Aldrich examines the manifest that lists not just goods for delivery, but also special orders the monastery has placed for specific religious occasions throughout the coming year. The monastery has contracted for live pike to arrive during the Lenten season, when their fierce appearance serves symbolic purposes during sermons about spiritual warfare against temptation. Rare lamprey will arrive before the visit of the regional bishop, whose refined palate expects delicacies that demonstrate proper respect for his ecclesiastical rank. The negotiation between Brother Aldrich and Herman reveals how monastery fish ponds created credit relationships that extended far beyond simple buying and selling. The monastery owes Herman payment for spring deliveries of breeding stock, but this debt will be settled not with coins, but with deliveries of monastery-raised fish scheduled for autumn harvest. Herman has already sold these future fish to communities downstream, creating chains of obligation and expectation that bind dozens of monasteries and traders into complex webs of mutual dependence. You discover that the monastery's fish ponds serve as production facilities for export markets that generate income far exceeding the community's own consumption needs. Brother Aldrich shows Herman samples of the specialty, breeds the monastery has developed through careful selective breeding programs. Their golden carp, prized for decorative ponds in noble estates, command prices 5 times higher than ordinary food fish. The monastery's dwarf pike, bred for keeping in castle moats where full-sized predators would consume all other fish, represent years of genetic selection that creates valuable intellectual property. The pricing negotiations reveal economic sophistication that challenges assumptions about medieval commercial knowledge. Herman and Brother Aldrich discuss seasonal price fluctuations, regional supply shortages, and quality premiums using terminology and concepts that parallel modern commodity trading. They understand how weather patterns in distant regions affect local fish prices, how religious calendar dates create predictable demand cycles, and how political tensions can disrupt trade routes and create arbitrage opportunities. Brother Aldrich's knowledge extends to understanding fish as commodity investments that appreciate over time in ways that parallel more familiar forms of medieval wealth storage. Large carp that might feed a dozen people today could spawn hundreds of offspring over their lifetime, making them more valuable alive than harvested. Breeding females represent capital assets whose productivity must be calculated against immediate consumption needs, creating investment decisions that require long-term planning and sophisticated risk assessment. The monastery participates in futures markets for fish delivery that demonstrate advanced financial instruments. Medieval communities developed to manage agricultural and aquacultural risk. Herman shows contracts where the monastery has agreed to deliver specific quantities of particular fish species at predetermined dates, months in the future. These agreements protect both buyer and seller against price volatility while ensuring adequate supplies for predictable seasonal demand. You learn that the monastery's reputation for fish quality creates brand value that commands premium prices in distant markets. Customers specifically request fish raised in the monastery's ponds because of their superior flavour, size and appearance compared to wild-caught alternatives. This reputation took decades to establish and requires constant maintenance through quality control and customer service that modern businesses would recognise as sophisticated marketing practices. The transportation challenges of moving live fish across medieval distances reveal ingenious solutions that enabled long-distance aquatic commerce. Herman's wagons include specially designed tanks with paddle wheels operated by the wagon's motion that keep water circulated during travel. Compartments with different water temperatures accommodate species with varying environmental requirements. Emergency supplies of fresh water, fish medicine, and specialised foods enable multi-week journeys that keep fish healthy and marketable upon arrival. The monastery's fish export business requires coordination with broader transportation networks that connect water-based and land-based trade routes. River barges carry monastery fish downstream to markets in larger cities, while overland caravans distribute products to inland communities. The monastery maintains relationships with shipping agents, warehouse operators, and retail merchants who handle different aspects of fish distribution, creating supply chains that span hundreds of miles. You discover that fish trading creates diplomatic relationships between monasteries that transcend political boundaries and religious divisions. Brother Aldrich shows correspondence from communities following different monastic rules, speaking different languages, and owing allegiance to competing political authorities. Their shared interest in aquaculture creates bonds that survive wars, political changes, and theological disputes, making fish traders unofficial ambassadors who carry information and negotiate agreements across otherwise hostile territories. The monastery's breeding programs respond to market demands that shape their genetic selection priorities beyond simple food production. Noble estates want ornamental fish with specific colour patterns and unusual characteristics. Urban markets prefer fish sizes that fit standard cooking vessels and serve typical family meal portions. Monastic communities order fish that grow quickly on cheap vegetable scraps and tolerate crowded conditions. Each market segment drives different breeding objectives that require specialised knowledge and long-term commitment. The seasonal timing of fish harvests aligns with religious calendars across Christian Europe to create predictable market cycles that traders like Herman can anticipate and profit from. Lenten season creates massive demand for fish that begins building weeks before Ash Wednesday, as communities preserve supplies for the long fasting period. Christmas season generates demand for luxury fish species that serve celebratory meals after Advent fasting ends. Easter creates markets for both fasting fish during Holy Week and feast fish for resurrection celebrations. Brother Aldrich explains how the monastery's fish ponds provide economic insurance against crop failures that could otherwise devastate the community's finances. Fish populations can increase rapidly when grain becomes expensive, providing protein that doesn't compete with human food sources for land use. During surplus years, fish can be preserved and stored or sold to generate income that supports the monastery through future difficulties. This economic flexibility makes fish ponds valuable assets that justify their construction and maintenance costs. The monastery participates in commodity exchanges where fish serve as currency for purchasing goods and services. The religious community cannot produce internally. Brother Aldrich trades fish for iron tools manufactured in distant cities, exotic spices imported from Mediterranean ports, and specialized religious items crafted by urban artisans. These barter arrangements create economic relationships that give isolated monasteries access to global trade networks. You observe how Hermann's accounting methods track complex multi-party transactions that involve seasonal credits, quality guarantees, and performance bonds that demonstrate sophisticated commercial law and contract enforcement. The monastery's reputation for honest dealing and reliable delivery creates trust relationships that enable credit transactions and partnership agreements that would be impossible without established business relationships built over decades of successful commerce. The fish trade generates employment opportunities for lay workers who support monastery operations without taking religious vows. Specialized craftsmen build and maintain fish transport equipment. Skilled workers manage fish processing and preservation operations. Merchants and traders earn commissions facilitating sales between producers and consumers. The monastery's aquaculture operations create economic multiplier effects that benefit entire regional economies. The knowledge transfer that occurs through fish trading networks spreads technological innovations and management techniques across vast geographic areas, faster than formal academic institutions could achieve. Hermann carries information about new breeding techniques, pond construction methods, disease treatments, and market opportunities that help monastery communities improve their operations and adapt to changing economic conditions. As evening deepens and Hermann's wagon disappears into the gathering darkness, carrying monastery fish toward distant markets, while leaving behind goods from far-off waters, you realize that these quiet monastery ponds serve as nodes in economic networks that connect communities across continents, transforming isolated religious houses into participants in commerce that spans the known world and binds medieval Europe together through currents of trade that flow as reliably as the water feeding these sacred pools. The first stars appear in the darkening sky as you stand once more beside the great pond where your journey began, watching the gentle ripples that mark evening feeding time for the monastery's aquatic communities. Brother Aldrich moves with the quiet confidence of someone whose life has been shaped by decades of tending these sacred waters. His evening rounds, a meditation of movement and observation that brings each day's cycle to its peaceful close. The surface of the water reflects not just starlight, but the accumulated wisdom of generations who understood that managing these ponds required far more than simple fish husbandry. You can see now how every stone in the carefully constructed walls, every channel that guides water flow, every decision about which fish to harvest and which to preserve, represents layers of knowledge that connected practical necessity with spiritual devotion, local needs with distant markets, daily routine with eternal rhythms. Brother Aldrich completes his final feeding of the day, scattering handfuls of grain across the water's surface with movements that had become as natural as breathing. The carp rise to meet their evening meal with lazy confidence, their feeding creating concentric circles that spread across the pond's surface like prayers offered to the darkening sky. These fish have grown fat and healthy under his care, living symbols of abundance carefully managed through seasons of plenty and scarcity alike. The quiet sounds of the monastery settling into evening prayer drift across the water from the chapel where Brother Aldrich's fellow monks gather for compline, the day's final communal worship. His own devotion takes different form here, beside the ponds, where the gentle splash of feeding fish and the soft trickle of water through stone channels create their own sacred music. The contemplative nature of fish keeping, with its requirements for patience, observation and gentle intervention, shapes spiritual practice as surely as formal liturgy. You understand now how these monastery fish ponds embodied medieval Christianity's understanding that caring for creation was itself a form of prayer and worship. The complex regulations governing when fish could be eaten and when they were forbidden reflected deeper theological beliefs about the relationship between physical and spiritual nourishment, between bodily discipline and divine grace. Every meal drawn from these waters carried religious significance that transformed simple nutrition into communion with sacred purpose. The seasonal rhythms that governed pond management connected the monastery's daily life to cosmic cycles that medieval people experienced more intimately than modern communities can imagine. The lengthening nights of winter that slowed fish metabolism also extended the hours of prayer and contemplation. The spring awakening that brought fish back to active feeding paralleled the resurrection themes of Easter season. The summer abundance that filled ponds with growing fish reflected the generosity of divine providence that sustained all creation. The economic networks radiating outward from these ponds reveal how medieval monasteries participated in commercial relationships that spanned continents while maintaining their commitment to spiritual values. The fish that swam in monastery waters connected isolated religious communities to urban markets, noble courts, and distant monasteries through trade relationships built on trust, reputation, and mutual benefit. These economic connections provided practical support for contemplative life while spreading monastic influence far beyond monastery walls. The sophisticated knowledge required for successful aquaculture demonstrates how medieval religious communities preserved and advanced scientific understanding during centuries when formal academic institutions remained rare and fragmented. Monastery fish keepers developed techniques for selective breeding, disease management, water chemistry control, and ecosystem balance that anticipated many principles modern aquaculture has rediscovered. Their careful observations and experimental methods contributed to bodies of knowledge that influenced agriculture, medicine, and natural philosophy. The diversity of aquatic life cultivated in monastery waters challenges popular assumptions about medieval capabilities and ambitions. These religious communities managed complex ecosystems that included dozens of species with different requirements, behaviors, and economic values. Their success required understanding of biology, ecology, chemistry, and engineering that demonstrates intellectual sophistication often underestimated in popular histories of the medieval period. Brother Aldrich's evening inspection reveals how daily routines of pond management embodied larger philosophical approaches to human relationships with natural world. His gentle movements around the pond edges, his careful observation of fish behaviour, his attention to water quality and ecosystem health reflect medieval Christian understanding that humans served as stewards responsible for caring for divine creation, rather than simply exploiting natural resources for immediate benefit. The integration of practical necessity with spiritual devotion that characterises monastery fish keeping represents medieval synthesis of material and transcendent concerns that modern secular society often struggles to achieve. These monks understood that feeding the body and nourishing the soul were complementary rather than competing objectives, that careful attention to earthly responsibilities enhanced rather than distracted from heavenly contemplation. As Brother Aldrich completes his evening rounds and begins walking toward the monastery buildings where candlelight glows in chapel windows, you can see how his life's work exemplifies the medieval monastic ideal of ora et labora, pray and work. His labour with fish and water has been prayer in action, while his prayers have informed and elevated his practical work into something approaching sacred art. The monastery bells begin tolling compline, their bronze voices carrying across the darkened landscape to mark the end of another day in the endless cycle of prayer, work and rest that has continued here for centuries. The sound seems to resonate from the water itself, as if the ponds have absorbed decades of prayer and now release it back into the night air as offering and blessing. The fish continue their quiet movements beneath the surface, following instincts and behaviours shaped by millions of years of evolution, but now guided by human intelligence and care toward purposes, both practical and sacred. Their lives unfold in rhythms that connect momentary feeding with seasonal migration, daily survival with reproductive cycles, individual growth with community abundance. You realise that these monastery fish ponds represent something larger than efficient food production or clever economic arrangement. They embody a way of living that integrated human needs with natural processes, individual devotion with community welfare, local self-sufficiency with global connection, temporal concerns with eternal values. The medieval monks who created and maintained these aquatic communities achieved a kind of harmony between human culture and natural environment that offers lessons relevant to modern challenges. The water continues its quiet movement through channels and ponds, following paths carved by human hands but flowing according to laws older than civilization. This same water has supported fish communities for generations, has provided sustenance during countless fasting seasons, has reflected the faces of monks whose names are forgotten, but whose patient work continues in the living systems they created and maintained. As darkness settles completely over the monastery grounds, and the fish ponds become invisible except for the gentle sounds of moving water, an occasional splash of feeding, you can feel the profound peace that comes from witnessing lives lived in harmony with natural rhythms and spiritual purpose. These medieval monks found ways to make their daily work serve both practical necessity and transcendent meaning, creating legacies that endure long after their individual lives ended. The monastery fish ponds stand as testament to human capability for creating abundance through patient attention to natural processes, for building sustainable systems that support both immediate needs and long-term flourishing, for finding sacred purpose in humble daily tasks. In their quiet waters, medieval Christianity achieved a vision of harmony between heaven and earth. that continues to inspire centuries after the last monk completed his evening rounds and walked toward chapel for final prayers. The gentle sound of water flowing through stone channels carries into the night a whisper of continuity, connecting past and future through present moment awareness of the sacred ordinary, the divine mundane. The eternal now reflected in peaceful waters where fish swim in darkness, following ancient patterns while sustained by human care that transforms necessary work into contemplative practice and practical devotion. Thank you for joining us on this gentle journey through the sacred waters of medieval monastery life. If you enjoyed our work and are still awake, check out our other content exploring the quiet corners of history where daily life revealed profound truths about human nature and divine purpose. And if you have fallen asleep, rest well and enjoy the campfire.